Welcome to the Healthy Reasonings podcast with Dr. Andre. You are now listening to your number one source for clear, unfiltered conversations about your health and wellness. Join us every Tuesday for success stories, educational topics, and interviews with wellness experts from around the world. You can listen to this podcast on your computer, phone, or any other electronic device that streams podcasts, or download each episode and listen to it on the go. Let's get started with today's episode.
We'll see. All right, everybody. Welcome to what should be episode 14 of the Healthy Reasonings podcast. I'm so excited, and the reason why I'm excited is because we have a very special guest this week. And the truth is that about 12 minutes ago, we attempted to start this episode. And to be honest, I was getting goosebumps at one point at the depth of information that our guest was able to provide. And just about that time, we recognized that we were having some tech issues, which seem to have resolved now. And we're going to trust the technology to preserve what promises to be an extremely informative episode of the Healthy Reasonings podcast. Before we jump into that, I want to acknowledge some very keen healthy reasoners. The first of which is P. Panayi, who comments, "Hi, Dr. Andre, great podcast. You have expanded my knowledge to another tool. I find myself hooked on your podcast, eager for the week to pass to hear what else you have to share. Thank you, Paul." Well, Paul, thank you for your kind words. It is very encouraging to recognize that somebody is listening, if it's even just one person. I mean, Spotify tells me that I hit a milestone this week of 1,000 plays of this podcast, which is something I'm extremely grateful for. But to hear an actual person respond is a delight. And secondly, Denise J. White says, "Thank you so much for such an interesting podcast today, D. White." Denise, I am doing this for you and all the other healthy reasoners out there. This is your number one podcast for clear, unfiltered information about health and wellness. All right, I've gotten that out of the way. You guys have no idea how excited I am right now because I suspected that our guest today would be helpful, but I had no idea. And as I said in the first take of this episode, I've known this gentleman for practically all my life and only recently realized what his occupation was. So a thought came to me recently that I should probably ask him a few questions that we didn't answer in episode 12 on glyphosate, but with a broader perspective on pesticide use in general and the impact on human health. So with that long preamble, please allow me to introduce the illustrious Michael Ramsay. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here with your listeners as well.
Did you recognize how modest his response was? Don't let that fool you guys. This gentleman, I honestly didn't realize how much information was buried beneath that calm demeanor. So let's jump right into it. I have known you for years as Uncle Michael, but today we're going to call you Michael because Uncle Michael is going to be a little weird repeatedly. So, Michael, could you let us know what it is that you do for a living?
All right, well, let me step back a little. For over 10 years, I was the head of the Pesticide Controls Authority in Jamaica, and that was in the Ministry of Health because it was recognized that pesticide use is a health issue more than it is an agricultural production issue. But in 2018, I left that job and I'm now working as a consultant with the Rotterdam Convention, which is part of the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is a part of the United Nations agencies groups.
So it sounds to me then like the authorities, global authorities, are at least aware of the potential impact of pesticide use on human health. Is that fair?
Definitely. But first of all, we have to go and say that almost every country of the world has a pesticide regulatory authority. Some in the Caribbean are very advanced, and some have their hiccups and the stops and starts. But everybody recognizes that there is a problem and pesticides need to be regulated. Moving a little further than that, industrial chemicals, several of them are also problems, but that aspect is not well regulated at all in many countries. And then there is a third aspect, which is the chemicals, whether pesticides or other chemicals, that cause irreversible damage to the environment. And those, almost nobody bothers to consider those, even though that's going to affect generations to come.
So, wow, so much wrapped up in that simple statement. We're going to unpack that one, but you made a very curious statement when we tried to do take one of this episode. And it's a statement that I made independently of speaking to you 2 weeks ago. And it is that anything really can act as a toxin. Is that fair?
We say in the pesticide world, there's no such thing as a safe pesticide.
Wow. Wow.
But which is quite understandable. You may have said it before, but sugar can be a toxin, salt can be a toxin, even water in too high amounts in too short a time can cause hallucinogenic symptoms.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So it is not unreasonable to say, therefore, that improper use of pesticides has human health implications.
I would go a little further than that. In that,
go ahead, sir.
Even proper use of pesticides can have health implications. Again, you see, some things are more dangerous than others, and there is no really safe way of using them. What we have found from surveys that I've been involved in around the Caribbean is that farmers, when they are mixing and spraying pesticides in their fields, they don't use the appropriate personal protective equipment, and therefore they're going to get exposed. So the more harmful of the chemicals are going to end up in their lungs, for example, because they don't use respirators. And once they get in their body, they're going to cause the harm that the manufacturer has already found out. And secondly, nobody bothers to read the label of chemicals, whether for household use or for agriculture use. And therefore they don't see what the hazard warnings are that the manufacturers are forced to put on the label. I mean, to give you a different example altogether, mouthwash. If you read the label of the mouthwash, it said, if ingested, seek immediate medical attention from a poison center. You know, and really, that to me, that's not a laughing matter at all. It's serious. Because this is something that you buy to put in your mouth.
Yeah. I'm sorry. It's sometimes the irony of these things hits me very harshly, and I end up laughing. I recognize entirely that it's not funny, but you're so right. the warning labels in some ways almost are a formality. Because it's well understood that they're probably not going to be read, or at the very best, they're going to be read and ignored.
Yes. Well, they'll be read in part by some people,
Yeah.
and in others
Yeah.
they won't. But again,
Yeah.
sticking with the household pesticides for a minute before we get into other things. I heard a medical doctor, very experienced person, that she saw a croaking lizard at the top of her wall, and she went under the croaking lizard, well, not too under because she didn't want it to jump on her, and she took out an insect spray and was spraying the croaking lizard, and all that chemical came down on her and she inhaled it, and she ended up having to get medical attention.
Wow.
So I mean, this is somebody who supposed to know better, but she's using an insecticide to kill a reptile.
Yeah.
I suppose if you spray
yeah.
enough of it and the reptile is going to drown in it, I don't know.
Wow, that is, I will admit that I am stymied at the moment because you're you're dropping so much truth. I'm literally trying to keep up, because I've long recognized that this particular topic, though it has been the reason why so many farmers present to my office with cancer, unfortunately, I tried to be fair in commencing this episode and recognizing that I, in fact, am a medical doctor and not an expert in pesticides. But your statement just now is enough for 3 episodes, because it's a common practice to use insecticides on lizards, in Jamaica at least.
Yes.
And probably elsewhere. And I'm now realizing how little sense it makes.
All right, let me give you a different example, but again, household. And why household is particularly important is because in the household, you have vulnerable people. Little children, babies, elderly people, the sick. And these things are going to be used also in food preparation areas. So, for example, you see on the street corner people selling ants powder in little plastic bags. And then, having been purchased, generally the householder will take it back to their kitchen and they sprinkle it in the kitchen, because that's where the ants come for food. Ants powder is generally, that's the brand name, but the active ingredient is carbaryl, and it's almost 100% carbaryl. And carbaryl is a known carcinogen. So you're spreading this thing in your kitchen. Also for roaches, boric acid or borax type products, they're sprinkled in the kitchen, and that can cause reproductive problems in women.
All right, I am.
You want one more example?
I'm afraid to say yes. Well, go ahead, sir. Go right ahead.
Traditionally,
This is gold.
Babies from newborn up while they're in a crib, to protect them against mosquitoes, there are 2 things. One is the mosquito net, but the second thing traditionally was a mosquito coil. So what you're doing is you have lit a product that vaporizes an insecticide, and that baby is breathing it for the hours and hours and hours. Plus they are breathing in the smoke, and smoke can also cause cancer as well.
All right, listeners, healthy reasoners, we are gonna. This is too much. We're gonna have to take a break. We're gonna break for however long these commercials normally take. I think it's like 30 seconds, and then we'll be right back with Michael Ramsay, who has proven to be quite easily the most modest guest we've had so far, because in the space of less than 14 minutes, he has dropped enough information on us to last us for at least a couple episodes. So let's take a quick break. Let's listen to what our sponsors have to say, and we'll be right back with this illustrious gentleman.
In a world that moves too fast, it's easy to lose touch with what truly matters, your well-being. At Teshuva Wellness, we believe in a return to balance, to healing, to your best self. Our holistic approaches nurture not just your body, but also your soul. Whether you're seeking peace, energy, or a deeper connection, we're here to guide you every step of the way. Our medical experts specialize in holistic treatments for chronic diseases, ranging from autoimmune illnesses to cancer. Our treatments are safe, non-toxic, and effective. Because at Teshuva Wellness, your journey to wellness is our greatest commitment. Visit our website today at teshuvawellnessja.com or call 1-876-787-8197. That's 1-876-787-8197. Teshuva Wellness. Return to health. Return to your best self.
We're back, and I am very happy that I pushed past the technology and got a chance to sit with the great Michael Ramsay, who sits calmly behind his computer screen and totally turns our world upside down with simple statements that we have not taken into consideration. I want to just quickly
Can I give you two more examples, moving away from homes?
I want to establish first your let's establish two things. One is that Mr. Ramsay is not speaking on behalf of any specific organization on this podcast. Let's get that out of the way. And two, I wanted to establish that a large part of what your career has involved is specifically to identify where pesticides can have dangerous impacts on human health. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So it's actually why he does what he does. He's trying to ensure that we are safe. And so everything that he expresses today is in that vein, which is exactly what we need. Wow, go right ahead, sir. Two more examples. I'll just sit back and listen.
Well, the first thing is that it is impossible to be safe. And therefore, I don't know if the old adage, what you don't know won't hurt you. But for example, pesticide residues are in a lot of the foodstuff that we eat, both the imported and in the ones grown here in Jamaica. And the scientific community has allowed more than 0 pesticides in our foodstuff. In other words, there's an acceptable maximum residue limit, and it varies from pesticide to pesticide. The other thing to understand is that even in the US, they also test certified organic produce, and they find pesticides in it as well too, because pesticides drift. And thirdly, mentioning Roundup specifically, the Center for Disease Control, CDC, in 2023 tested the urine of over 1,100 adults and children in the US. And they found that over 80% of those adults and children had glyphosate in their urine. And many of them had been nowhere near a farm ever.
Yeah.
But let me give you
hearing that study.
Yeah. Oh, you mentioned that already.
I'd heard it somewhere, I'd read it somewhere years ago, and I brought it up in episode 12, but I'm so glad that you have reiterated it, because I was wondering if it was my imagination, because the truth is, this is par for the course for you. You live, breathe, God forbid, you breathe pesticide. No, you wouldn't want to do
No.
that. But you breathe the research into the use of pesticides on a daily basis and have for some time. And so for you, it goes without saying that some of these things are reality. But there has been what I call a tug of war of information, especially over the past, I'd estimate, a decade or so, where there have been many half-truths expressed as it relates to pesticides. And I dare say that you are the closest I've heard to somebody who is simply laying out the facts, unadulterated facts, and I appreciate that. Please go ahead.
All right. I think that people in this civilized modern world don't think outside of the chemical box. So, for example, there was a case a few years ago where a luxury hotel, this was in the newspaper, so it's, common knowledge. There was a luxury hotel where the staff had their own canteen to eat their meals. There was a roach problem in that canteen, so they called in the pest control people who went in and sprayed it out, locked up the room, and went away. On the Monday morning, the room was opened. Some members of staff went in to eat their breakfast, and it ended up that almost all of them had to seek medical attention, and 2 of them had to be hospitalized. And I use this illustration in some of my presentations to kind of see how the audience thinks. And all the audience were thinking about is either one, that the room should have been opened up earlier to let out the chemical, or that they should have been using a quote-unquote safer pesticide. None of them thought of the fact that if the room had been regularly cleaned and be sanitary, there would be no roach problem in the first place. And secondly, rather than spraying, there are now roach baits which cause no contamination to speak of, because you're only using a bead less than the size of a gungo pea at maybe 5-foot intervals. And the roaches come and eat the bait and die, and then other roaches eat the dead roaches, and so on, till there are no roaches at all. So thinking outside the chemical box is very important. Here's another one. There is a kindergarten school I'm associated with. I just found out recently that after every summer holidays, they call in a pest control person who sprays out the kitchen of the school canteen. And the only way I found out was that the school administration was asking me for another pest control company because the one they used previously just wasn't able to do it. So I said to them, why are you spraying out the kitchen? And worse, why are you spraying out an area where there are little children coming into school in a week's time? Again, they're not thinking outside of the chemical box.
This is, I think it would be fair to say that this information is hair-raising, because your experience clearly extends, even though you're giving examples related to Jamaica, your experience clearly extends, and your affiliations extend well beyond our shores.
Yes.
Which means these examples, though Jamaican in location, are probably quite common elsewhere.
Oh, definitely. When I give presentations in other Caribbean countries, I ask them, could this happen here? And in all of the countries, they say definitely yes.
I will admit I'm speechless, but I'm going to push on for the benefit of both my knowledge and the healthy reasoners that will invariably listen to this for years to come. So I'm going to push you a little bit, because I know you're no you're not shy about stating facts. You made a statement earlier that piqued my interest. You said specifically that there was a chemical you made reference to that was a known carcinogen. Bear with me because it's going to sound like I'm asking a simple question, but are you saying that there are some pesticides that have been specifically demonstrated or at least linked to the development of cancer?
Oh, there's several that there is no dispute whatsoever. For example, carbaryl or ants powder, as we call it. Then there's malathion, which is a common insecticide that people use in their gardens around their homes, and therefore risk contaminating the whole house. Diazinon, which is closely linked to malathion and for the same purpose. Oh, by the way, as you may know, we used to exclusively use malathion for mosquito fogging by the Ministry of Health.
Oh my goodness.
But fortunately, the mosquitoes got resistant to it, so they had to switch to other things. Then there's permethrin, which is the active ingredient in several pet powders against fleas and ticks. So whoever is going to apply them and of course have no protection is going to end up with permethrin going into their lungs and their eyes and their nose. And there are several herbicides against weeds and several fungicides against various fungal diseases.
So here's my challenge now. This is like trying to drink from a fire hose, because I knew instinctively that something was wrong. I knew that pesticides were contributing to the illnesses that I see in my patients daily, cancer being the most common, but there are several others. And I know that, based on my training across the world, I have various ways of demonstrating that the pesticides are present. But I've always felt like there was some amount of a gray area in which there was no acknowledgement that the two things were linked. So this is eye-opening, to say the least. And I'm stymied. So therefore, I'll go in this direction. I mentioned in episode 12 that there was a compound, and I'm gonna hold on to that one for now, that I was exposed to an organic natural compound that is formed from volcano ash. For those of you who are very curious, you can look that up and figure out what I'm talking about, but I won't name it here. And it has been repeatedly demonstrated to bind specifically to, let's just use pesticides arbitrarily, one in particular, but pesticides in general, and to safely escort them out of the gastrointestinal tract. That substance has been a mainstay of how I treat my patients with cancer who I believe have pesticide toxicity as a contributor. And it is a large part of why I've been successful in helping several of these patients to heal. Now, I'm going to ask a twofold question. One,
sorry, could I ask you a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So the patient ingests this chemical from volcanic ash.
Yes.
But by and large, the exposure to a carcinogenic pesticide would come from them breathing it in.
Correct.
So how does the gastrointestinal tract and what gets into the whole body system through the lungs, how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a beautiful conversation because we're going both ways with the discussion. So what we know to be true is that the lung is not very good at excreting toxins. And in general, what happens is when the lung tries to get rid of toxins that it has been exposed to, it usually simply results in the airways shutting down. So patients who demonstrate with asthma, present with asthma, pulmonary fibrosis, lung-related disease due to the chemical toxicity. So the body prefers to use the liver, the skin, and hopefully not the kidneys to get rid of toxins, even if they have not come into the body via the mouth. So the liver is the primary organ responsible for the majority of detoxification pathways in our body. But as you are probably aware, the liver has limitations on how it gets rid of these toxins. The general idea at a very basic level is to push it out into the gastrointestinal tract, and hopefully it will then go onwards into the toilet. But to get to the GI tract in the first place, the liver has to literally package these substances in a way that makes them excretable. And what we have found generally is that the liver becomes overwhelmed with these toxins at a certain point. And this is not news to you. We're just having a conversation back and forth. And then the substances, at the very least, accumulate along the lining of the gastrointestinal wall. We know they're scattered elsewhere as well, but there's a large amount of them that seem to just settle there. And that's a whole other lecture as to why they choose there to settle. So what we end up doing then is we gradually clear those watershed areas of toxins, which then takes a lot of the pressure off the other organs and allows them to better be able to, over a period of time, get rid of the remaining toxins. So it's a complicated way of assisting the body, but one that seems to work, even if the absorption route or the method of introduction of the toxin was not orally. How does that sound?
That's interesting. The surveys that I mentioned before also found that when the victim inhaled the pesticide, they got a headache or they got dizzy, which would seem to indicate that it got to the brain.
Precisely.
Right. It's also well known that pesticides that are oil-based are stored in the fat cells. So it is suggested that if somebody is overweight and they have been over the years storing more and more of these chemicals in their fat, if they start to lose weight, that's worse because now all these chemicals are released into the body.
There we go.
So maybe they should remain fat.
So, it's funny because all of these things I've said for years without knowing the research that you're privy to, but you're absolutely correct that when they're stored in the fat, we see these gentlemen in Jamaica and otherwise, we refer to them as having a beer belly. And you and I know that beer bellies often occur in gentlemen who do not even drink. As a matter of fact, now that you mention it, I see a lot of the farmers with this belly issue as well. So that's interesting. Again, despite their manual labor, quite a few of them tend to have a punch, as we say. And that supports what you just said. But yeah, the solution in that case and has been, as I said, to put them on this compound and to start clearing some of the watershed areas of the toxins so that the body then, when it starts to work on that which is stored in the fat, the sudden release of those years of accumulated toxins doesn't overwhelm the body. Which brings me to, let's take a quick break and then I'm going to change gears even more. So let's take a quick break and listen to this short announcement and then we'll be right back with, I don't know what adjective to use. Let's just say the great Michael Ramsay for now, because you have opened our eyes and ears to much more than we were planning for. Quick break and we'll be right back.
Healthy Reasoners. Remember to follow this podcast so you can help us get the information to more healthy reasoners around the world. Please also click the bell so you can be updated as soon as new episodes are ready. Leave us some really nice comments and, of course, a 5-star review. Thank you. Now back to today's episode.
All right, we are back, and this is the podcast episode that I kind of wish would never end. We're already 33 minutes in, and it feels like we've barely scratched the surface of what's possible. Probably the first guest I've had who has equally asked me as tough a question as I've asked him, and yet our answers are lining up perfectly, though we have not been exposed to each other's experiences necessarily. So I've been seeing things on the clinical side and making observations. Michael has actually had the evidence placed before him, multiple surveys and I imagine biochemical evaluations and reports being presented to him over the years of his career, and he continues to serve in that capacity, so he's well positioned to speak on the impact of pesticides on human health. And he's already given us more than enough information to keep us thinking for another couple of episodes. But here is since I have you on the podcast, I'll take my executive privilege to ask you this question, which bothers me to no end. I have had at least 3 farmers present to me with advanced cancer. They're all from the southern coast of Jamaica. We're not going to delve into that too much, but that's largely where we do a lot of our farming. And due to the conditions there, the farmers invariably use a lot of agricultural pesticides, amongst other things. Here's my challenge, Michael. In all 3 of these cases, I can see vividly in my mind, the gentlemen have, upon being treated by me, had resolution of their cancer, well documented. I've sent them back to their primary physician or the doctor who was seeing them to begin with, and they've demonstrated that the cancer has at least reversed, even if it's not completely undetectable. And invariably what they do next is to return to farming. So here's a tough question for you. You made a bold statement, which I loved, to say that there really is no such thing as a safe pesticide. My question, which you may not have an immediate answer for, but even if you have a spark of an answer, that would be appreciated. Are there innovative ways to farm without this excessive use of pesticides?
I'm going to take it from 2 sides.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, farmers are not unintelligent people.
Right.
They know what works and they stick to what works. Mm-hmm. They are not sure generally as to what causes health problems, even though if they really wanted to know, they could find out. But many of us don't want to know. Secondly, they may decide that the short-term benefit versus the uncertain long-term problems, don't weigh out. Mm-hmm. Secondly, pesticides are very expensive. So farmers don't want to waste their money in excessive use of pesticides. So they generally use pesticides when they feel they have no choice. In fact, in surveys that we have done, there were 2 particular responses from farmers that I use in all my presentations. One said, whatever works, we have to use because we have to feed our family. We have no other choice. The second one was even worse. The person said, every time he uses this particular chemical, his eyes turn red and they burn severely. But he has to use it because he has to protect his crops. So that is the kind of attitude that some farmers have. Now, the thing is that there are alternatives, and in my thinking, if the alternatives were easy the farmers would not be spending their money on these expensive chemicals. So it's not easy. But there are things called integrated pest management, where you look on weather conditions to see, what weather conditions causes egg laying and the caterpillars to come out, for example. It looks at whether the larvae drop to the ground to pupate. It looks on whether dry soil versus moist conditions. It looks on predators and parasites of that particular pest. It looks on things like mulch, plastic mulch, for example, for weeds, suppressing weeds. So there are a myriad of things. There are also things like, basic things like crop rotation. If the farmer keeps planting the same crop over and over and over, the pest is going to attack over and over and over, but in greater numbers. But again, you see, it's a dynamic situation. The farmer, again, is not unintelligent. He knows that a certain pickup truck is going to come around, and what they want is what he's planting. If he switches and plants something else, they may not want that, and they will just pass his farm. So, the farmer is the one who understands his complexities better than we can sitting down and thinking through it, cerebrally. And then the other problem is how do you change attitudes?
Yeah.
Switching completely. We have the highest mortality rates on our roads is from motorbikes. And the main reason is they don't wear a helmet. And of course they do crazy things, all this other stuff. But the young men who see their friends and their family members dying from motorbike crashes, it doesn't sink in that they could be next.
Yeah.
How do you change that kind of attitude? So maybe, a person can be presented with all the information to make the right decision, and yet still they have a different set of priorities and come to a different decision.
So, all right.
But sorry, let me ask you a question I got along that line.
Yeah.
You don't mind if I ask you a question, right?
No, this is a Healthy Reasonings episode, my friend.
All right.
We love questions.
Inside of a house, why does a housewife buy a can of insecticide spray when there are other options? Keeping the kitchen clean is an easy option that requires no chemical except the soap or the detergent. Why don't they kill a roach with their shoe?
Yeah, which is largely what I will admit is done in my house. And we use something called diatomaceous earth. I don't know what your opinion is on that.
Oh, that's excellent, yeah.
Oh, thank God. Thank God. Because we practice as far as we can a non-toxic lifestyle. So as soon as I finish here, I'm going to tell my lovely wife, Nisha, that diatomaceous earth, which she was skeptical about at first until the ants disappeared,
Okay.
is at least approved by the great Michael Ramsay. So,
But the easier thing is to use soap and water and wipe along the ants' trail, so that they have no chemical trail to follow to get into the kitchen. And then, of course, looking for them to eat. Again, for all living organisms and pests that we are trying to control, whether in the agriculture or in household, they need food, water, and shelter. And you remove any one of those three and they will not be a problem.
All right, that sounds like a clip for Instagram right there.
So, for example, in agriculture, if you plant crops that the pests don't like, then there's no food for them, so you don't have that pest problem. In the kitchen, if you have proper sanitation, which takes work, yes, but it can be done, you won't have ants or roaches. They have nothing to eat. And for roaches in particular, they are also in the kitchen or the bathroom because they get water. So if there's no leak, no settled water at all, they can't survive, so they won't be there.
All right. So, I don't know how much more of this. My brain is going to think too fast if I continue along this line. So I want to say, first of all, thank you for a conversation that I didn't see coming. And I am not going to allow you to escape from what is a mandatory part of our guest episodes, which is what we call a weird and wonderful section. And a weird and wonderful section, listeners, you or people who are watching this will see the icons coming up shortly. If you're listening, then you'll know that we're at the weird and wonderful part of our interview. And the characteristics of this segment is the questions are not intended to be invasive, though they are personal. And I will ask you 2 questions, and you will ask me 2 questions. And these are not intended to be academic questions or otherwise. And that's pretty much the rules. So I will go first, and then you go next, and vice versa, until we've each asked each other 2. So my question to you, sir, is let's ask it this way. If you were to choose a song that is the theme for your life, what would you say?
That's a very hard question because I'm not really a music person. So
Go for it, man.
Say I don't have any particular song really.
All right. If you were to choose a book or poem,
A
you're
book
trying
or
to
a
escape,
poem?
but you shall not.
Well, the book would have to be
Yes.
the Bible, of course,
Okay.
as a Christian.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Good answer. Your question to me, sir.
All right.
Try
My
not to
question
dodge
will
it.
be really way out there, you know. Did you choose
hope I
that
don't have
shirt
to-
or did somebody give you as a gift?
Thank you, sir. You got the segment right. It is weird and wonderful. So the truth is that this was a gift, and that is exactly why I must wear it. Along that same line, I actually saw your son today, my good friend, and he actually inquired along the same line.
Okay.
So I see where you both expressed your genes today, because he asked a similar question. So yeah, it's one of those things that you have to do, and I don't really, it doesn't bother me much. Second question for you. This is a popular one. I've asked other guests this question, and so you will be no exception. If given the opportunity, would you wish to visit outer space?
Maybe in my younger days, but now I'm not a risk taker. So I visit
Okay.
outer space actually, but in
Comfort of your
Star
living
Trek
room.
was one of my favorites series, and I do a lot of reading on the Mars missions and see their pictures.
Okay, fair enough. Your last question to me.
That's a hard one. In terms of your work with cancer patients, is that a reasonable way to start a question? Or that's
Go for it, man.
too much back in what we were talking about?
Oh, and that's fine.
Okay.
It's your question. Go for it.
Okay. Do you see that there's any way of reaching people on the preventative side?
Excellent. Excellent. It's a double-edged question because I think I'll answer it this way. I think this episode is a good example of the issues that we have with cancer prevention as a concept. Because I think this is the first time that I've actually been able to sit with somebody who is an authority on the topic, who is able to comfortably state that some compounds are known to cause cancer. I think for years the prevailing thought on cancer has been that it has no known cause, or that there's a vague connection between some, exposures and cancer, which we obviously know is not the case. Now, when you culturally say that there's no known cause for cancer, what you're then saying is that there's no way of preventing it. And we both know that that's ridiculous, because we've just spent 49 minutes and 13 seconds talking about ways to limit exposure to pesticides, and we've stated categorically that pesticides cause cancer.
Some pesticides.
So my challenge, some pesticides have been linked specifically to cancer. So my challenge, therefore, is exactly that. It's breaking through the cultural dissonance that you spoke about earlier, the cognitive dissonance, where people are still under the guise that there's no clear cause for cancer and that it just happens. And so before even talking about prevention, which is a real thing, I first have to talk about establishing that link between cancer and what potentially causes it. I think our generation is probably not going to have, I may not speak negatively, our generation might not experience the full benefit of re-establishing that connection, but I'm hoping that the next generation will be so comfortable with conversations like these that the only logical step to follow would be how to prevent cancer. Yeah, that's too deep?
No, I am actually thinking much further than you are saying. It has been established that, for example, mutagens, some of which are pesticides, affect the parents even before they conceive a child. And when they conceive the child, they pass on the damaged DNA to the child, and the child is going to grow up with that damaged DNA.
That is very deep.
And then, of course, it spreads throughout the population. Each generation, you get more and more and more. So actually, you and I are in different generations, but your generation has already damaged the next one. Unintentionally, of course.
Wow.
So maybe it has to start with little children.
Yeah. This can span so many other conversations. This is an open-ended discussion that we probably should pause, because we can talk about things like how often we're seeing autism now.
Yes.
Versus when either you or I was growing up, and what are the potential causes. But once we start talking, we're not going to stop. So I think I'm going to do the gentlemanly thing, sir, and I'm going to say thank you for possibly causing me to have a sleepless night tonight.
And your listeners, when they hear the recording.
And several of my listeners might find that they're thinking so much about what we spoke about today. Not in a negative way, but it's so much food for thought, no pun intended, that and it's all condensed into one 52-minute episode. This is packed full of gems that we probably need to explore further. And certainly for me, I feel a sense of almost validation, because there are things that I've seen in my clinical practice that maybe if I had been more diligent in looking at some of the research you look at on a daily basis, I would see the connection in black and white. But up until today, I've only had a sense that something has to be connected here. So I'm grateful for this in many ways. And I know my healthy reasoners. Healthy reasoners, before I release this gentleman, I want to insist that if you're listening right now, jump into the comment section on your podcast player of choice. My recommendation is Spotify, not because I'm in any way affiliated with them, but that's the one that I check most often. Jump in and tell me what you're thinking of this discussion. Don't wait till tomorrow. Do it right now. Give us some comments. If you want to say something positive about Michael Ramsay, that's also welcome. I think he's in need of encouragement as he continues his work in looking at the available research between showing the impact, potential and real impact of pesticides on human health. I want to encourage you as well to reach out to me on social media, Wellness Doc Jamaica. Michael, do you want to leave your information or any way that the listeners can contact you? Is there a preference of yours?
No, they can contact you and then you can pass it on.
Okay, no problem. That's pretty much what most of our guests do anyway, so that's fine. So if you want to get in touch with this gentleman, please reach out to me. You know how to reach out to me, and I will pass along the information to him, and we'll take it from there. But this has been way more than any of us bargained for. I know I have at least 100 regular listeners, 88 weekly listeners now. So I think the 89 of us had no idea that this is what we're going to stumble into. But we're very grateful, Sir Mike. And I suspect it's fair to say that we will have you on again once we've had the ability to digest the depth of what you've shared in just a short episode today. Thank you so much. And to our listeners, God bless you and see you next week.
Okay, bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Healthy Reasonings podcast. Remember to subscribe to this podcast so you can be updated as soon as new episodes are ready. If you have a question, send us a voice memo on Spotify or type your questions out in the comments. For more information or to become a sponsor, please check the show notes for our contact information. See you soon.